History of a Teacher by Famous Fault. Chapter 31. Torture Master. Good evening, he greeted them as the two figures descended from platform 9 3/4, carefully making sure no one saw them. As soon as Rebecca and Yugi were standing safe and sound on King's Cross Station, Rebecca threw all called care out of the window and flew Raphael around the neck. She had missed him. Thank you, Yugi replied with a hushed voice and gave an unconvincing smile which Raphael didn't bother returning. In silence, they left the platform and headed for the parking lot. When they sat down in the car, Rebecca spoke. "Where's Tracy?" "In my apartment. Our intentions were to have her contact her parents after we got back from the Ministry of Magic. However, then you contacted us, and Tracy chose to wait. She still hasn't found an excuse for why she doesn't want to come home." Raphael fell silent and started the car. He carefully maneuvered the vehicle, a Land Rover created for all terrains, out onto the streets. London's traffic never ceased. It was as lively at midnight as it was on the middle of the day. The amount of people hadn't decreased either. Rebecca didn't comment that information. She wondered how Raphael could go along with something like that. He, if anyone, was sensitive when it came to family. She had expected him to force Tracy out of the deal entirely and send her to her parents. "The headmistress contacted me," Raphael said after they had sat silent a while, interrupting Rebecca's pondering. Yugi in the back seat made a disgusted sound and Rebecca stiffened. "Why?" Raphael looked at her disapprovingly. "To tell me you were expelled, and why. She also said that you should count on the fact that you'll never will find a school willing to accept anyone like you ever again, and that this will end up in your file, and will ensure that you'll never find a job anywhere in the wizarding world," Raphael said calmly. Rebecca stared out the window into the lively city. "Are you mad?" Raphael shrugged. "What would I? You made the choice to burn the Quidditch pitch down to the ground, like she put it. If that has ruined your chances in the wizarding world, then it's your problem, not mine." "Disappointed, then?" she asked, not comfortable with his indifferent tone. For some reason, Raphael smiled. It was a small smile which disappeared even before it appeared. "No, morally speaking, I should be angry and disappointed because you vandalized school property. I'm not. You can take responsibility for the aftermath yourself. And lastly, I would have done something in the same style had I been in your position at your age." Rebecca nodded. "There is something more to it. A creature from the dominion of the beasts extinguished the fire." The car made an unexpected move which clearly showed how surprised Raphael was. Yugi gasped. He had not seen what happened when Rebecca put the Quidditch pitch in flames. He had only seen how it looked afterwards. He had not known about the dragon. "Are you sure the dragon was from the Dominion?" Raphael asked. Yugi spoke for the first time since Raphael had greeted him. "It must have been. The shadow creatures are weakened now that there's no one left to wield the shadows which empower them. The shadows only obey those who are meant for them. Not one of these people is left anymore." Yugi touched the little red bag around his neck. "They could not have extinguished it." "A familiar dragon?" Raphael wondered, who took Yugi for his word without trouble. Rebecca nodded. "Tyrant dragon. He seemed to disapprove of my actions." She was bothered by that, but that was partly since she didn't know why he had disapproved. She had done a lot of different things of which he could have disapproved. It could have had to do with her small row with Peter and nothing with the fire. It could be a whole lot of different things. She was, however, grateful he had extinguished it before it had gotten out of hands. She wondered if it had something to do with what Firecracken had told her, that she would break Yugi's and the Pharaoh's spiral by teaching them a valuable lesson, and that she had to be prepared. Was she doing it wrong? Were her actions destroying the chance she had of helping them? She wasn't sure, but she was pretty convinced that getting a Tim back was the most logical of actions to help either of them. Raphael didn't say anything. He just sat quiet and thought deeply. Eventually he spoke. "Rebecca, do you know what your Ka is?" Rebecca shook her head immediately, but then she stopped to think. "My Patronus is Luster Dragon number 2. I think it could be him." Yugi frowned. "Are Patronuses supposed to be animals?" "Well, yes," Rebecca admitted, being just as bothered by that fact as Yugi was. "But mine isn't." "What's a Patronus?" Raphael asked, slightly irritated. "A Patronus is a positive energy field used as shields against the darkest of creatures like Dementors, which feed on happiness. They tend to take the form of an animal if the caster of the charm is skilled enough. But mine turned out to be a dragon, Luster Dragon number 2. Rebecca explained briefly. Raphael just nodded at the information. He took a final turn, parked, and stopped the engine. Rebecca looked at the building, which they had parked behind, and shook her head. That was so typical of Raphael. Yugi didn't even notice the state in which the building was in. In silence, the three made their way towards the building, which was eerie silent, considering its location. This close to central London, it should have been pulsing with life, but it reminded more of something from a horror movie. Rebecca was relieved when they reached the front door and headed up the stairs as Raphael quietly informed them that the elevator was not to be trusted under any circumstance. Tracy opened the door before Raphael had even started to reach for his key. She pulled Rebecca in and gave them a hug. "You moron! Don't tell me you actually burned the Quidditch pitch down." "I did," Rebecca replied as Yugi closed the door behind them. "I also handed Dean the book. I thought that connection would be most useful." Tracy stopped looking angry, and her expression turned to that of delight instead. "Really?" Rebecca nodded and sat down on the couch. The day had been long, and she was exhausted. "Yes, really. He'll keep us up to date with what is happening in the school. He, too, wants to help. If he can, that is." Rebecca looked at Raphael. "You made an appointment?" Yuki tensed. He didn't care for much else than that. His number one priority was getting a 10 back, and at that moment, it was Raphael who was most likely to be able to help him with that. "Yes, I did. He is the kind of person who is easily persuaded into doing what someone else wants, as long as he gains something from it. Having him postpone the process will be much easier than I expected it to be. With a little help from him, I'll also be able to locate the puzzle, and might even get a look at it. I don't know how much more I'll be able to do, though," Raphael said, and he too sat down. "When?" Yugi asked, not the slightest bit of hope in his voice. Rebecca, at the other hand, thought that Raphael had sounded more positive than she had expected. "Tomorrow," Raphael said, "in the afternoon." He fell silent, and they could all see he was thinking deeply. "Or make that today," he said suddenly, looking at the clock, showing an hour past midnight. "I think wisest would be if we all have as much rest as possible before tomorrow. Rebecca, you were coming with me. Tracy, you are going to contact your parents after we've slept. Do it before we leave, while we're gone, or after we come back. I don't care. Let them know you're fine." "Can I do anything?" Yugi wondered silently. "Keep a low profile," Raphael said, slightly inconsiderate. "Don't let anyone know you're in London, least of all that you have connections to me. I'd prefer if you stayed in the apartment." Yugi nodded. He had counted on something like that, although he did not like it. He would, under no circumstances, complain. They were all partly doing this because of him. He was the only one forced to help Atem. The rest had a free will in the matter, and yet they had stayed. Even Tracy. "Rebecca, Tracy, you two can take the bedroom. Yugi and I can take a couch each," Raphael ordered quickly, and it didn't take long until they were all safe and sound in bed, or what had to pass for it. However, neither Tracy nor Rebecca felt like sleeping, despite the heavy day in front of them. "You know what, Rebecca?" Tracy said as they together laid in the undersized double bed. "When I woke up in that hospital bed and saw you sitting there, I never could have dreamed that I'd end up like this." "And what's like this?" Rebecca asked warily. "Well, you know. Here I am laid with you in a bed in a horrible apartment in London, having fled the school together with Fred and George Weasley, of all people, trying to figure out what lie I'm going to tell my parents tomorrow, since I can't tell them that I'm trying to help the previously possessed history teacher to get the spirit of a 5,000-year-old pharaoh back, who the Ministry of Magic is currently trying to exterminate. That's like this. You sure turned my life upside down, Rebecca," Tracy muttered. "No one forces you to stay," Rebecca said, and yawned. She was tired. "But I want to do this, don't get me wrong. The fact remains, however, that this is an incredibly weird situation of which I'm not sure is all that ideal for anyone involved." Tracy sighed and stared at the ceiling. It had a greenish-white color and cracks all through the plaster. "Tracy, this little thing could ruin your future forever if it goes wrong," Rebecca warned. Tracy laughed at that. "You are far too open-minded, Rebecca. You can't see me like the rest of the wizarding world does. Since I'm a werewolf, they can hardly speak to me, let alone give me a job of any kind. We're shunned, Rebecca. I don't really have a future after Hogwarts." "Now that's sad," Rebecca stated, and she too stared at the ceiling. "What are you going to tell your parents?" "I don't know," Tracy said. "Help me figure..." Tracy was interrupted by a huge yawn on her part. Something out, will you? That'll be hard. I'm not good at making up excuses. I usually use the... Then Rebecca started to smile broadly. It was a genuinely happy smile. What are you smiling at? Tracy asked, sounding more asleep than awake. I have access to a computer again! She laughed and looked at Tracy, only to find the werewolf fast asleep. Tracy was hesitating, that was for sure. She looked rather comical standing there looking at the phone as if it was a scorpion about to sting her. She had dialed every but the last number, and she did not look eager to do that anytime soon. She had decided to call her parents before Rebecca and Raphael would leave. Now they were all gathered around the kitchen table with exception for Tracy, who was standing by the phone hanging on the wall. Go on, Tracy, Raphael said quietly, encouraging. Tracy pushed the final button and brought the word to her ear. I really don't like this, she told them as she nervously fidgeted with the phone cord. Hello? It had been quite a while since Tracy had heard her mother's voice, and her mother didn't sound happy at all. In fact, she sounded pretty close to heartbroken. Hello, Mom, Tracy said and let go of the phone cord. Tracy? Yes, Mom, it's me. My God, do you know how much you scared us? No, Mom, I do not. But I'm sorry anyway. Where are you? Come home. Why did you leave? Mom, I'm not coming home just yet. I have something to do first, Tracy said, who still hadn't come up with an excuse and therefore had decided to simply not tell her mother what was going on and leave it at that. What are you talking about? The school has turned into a minor version of hell. That, together with Umbridge's opinion on werewolves, I would have gotten kicked out within a week anyway. But then come home. Why won't you? I can't tell you, Mom. But perhaps I can after I've done it. Maybe. Maybe! Gypsy Davis, I will not allow such behavior. Come home immediately. It's bad enough that you left the school. I can't believe you would refuse to come home. Mom, you know all these superhero movies Dad likes so much where the main character always gets into trouble with their parents since they can't tell them what they're up to? Raphael couldn't help but to smile at that, although he didn't find the example fitting. But it could just work, and that was the main point. What does that have to do with anything? I have to save someone before I can come home, and I can't tell you. But I'm in good company, and I'll be coming home as soon as we're finished. Tracy, are you in danger? Tracy looked at the people sitting around the table. Rebecca shrugged. There was no telling how dangerous this was or could become. Nothing was certain at all. I don't know, Mom. Not at the moment, I think. Can I convince you to come home? Tracy's mother sounded slightly hopeful. No, Mom. I have to do this. It's important. Has it anything to do with the events at Hogwarts lately? Goodbye, Mom. I'll be in touch, Tracy said, and before her mother could protest, she hung up the phone. Raphael shook his head disapprovingly, but he didn't say anything. They had different things to focus on. He looked quite amusing in his wizarding wear, which Tracy had gotten for him before they had gone to the ministry. It did not suit him at all. Rebecca had simply taken her Hogwarts robes, although she had removed the emblem so no one would wonder what a Hogwarts student was doing out of the school at this time of year. When are you two leaving? Tracy asked and sat down on the last available chair, keen to steer the conversation in a different direction. Soon, Raphael said. This man will be meeting me in his office at the Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Rebecca will follow, too, and take the potion she made to turn people invisible. While I have a conversation with a weak link, Rebecca will look for the room in which the puzzle is kept. Rebecca nodded gravely. We have, however, not found a way to communicate with each other. It's unfortunate that we can't use modern technological devices. It would have made the job easier. There is no way of knowing when Raphael's meeting with the weak link ends, and it's hard to tell when the potion stops working. Why do you insist on calling him the weak link? Yugi asked, slightly annoyed. Alexander Bulstrode, Tracy said, the father of a classmate of mine. Millicent Bulstrode? Yugi said, surprised. Tracy nodded. Yes, indeed. I'd say that I hope he's like her. That would make that he can be talked into anything. But I suppose he can't be much like her. I reckon that for working on something like that, one needs some sort of brain. Miss Davis! Yugi said reproachful, sounding like a teacher for the first time in a while. Tracy went red. I'm sorry, she whispered, ashamed but couldn't help but smile a bit as she saw Rebecca's grin. Raphael sighed and stood up. Let's go. My meeting is scheduled in about 3/4 of an hour, and I do not want to be late. The rest stood up too, and Rebecca hurried to the kitchen cupboard where she kept the flask with rare invisibility potion. Tracy looked at it with a frown. You know, what they say is true. Light students really are capable of doing wonders. Rebecca shook her head. I'm good at potions. My spells still suck big time. You burned down the Quidditch pitch, Tracy protested. Rebecca shook the bottle she was holding in her hands. With the help of potions. Still, only a selected few can make invisibility potion, Tracy protested. It's incredible. Rebecca laughed out loud and leaned towards Tracy. And only a selected few can make the Wolfsbane potion? Motivation, Tracy stated unamused and pushed the Ravenclaw away gently. Then again, you are a Ravenclaw. Oh, fair old wise Ravenclaw. Raphael smiled as he from the sidelines watched the confusing exchange between his charge and the girl who had randomly showed up at his door. It was clear that it was Tracy who kept some life in the apartment. They would have been a rather depressed bunch without her. Tracy wished them luck, and Yugi just glared at them, looking rather gloomy as they left for the ministry. Raphael was standing in the door, waiting for her, but when Rebecca saw Yugi's sad expression and hopeless posture, she turned around and hugged him. Have some faith. He'll come back. Yugi didn't react, and Tracy looked at the small scenario with a frown. As Raphael and Rebecca closed the door behind them, she spoke. Professor Muto, no offense, but it's extremely interesting to see you outside the school. Don't call me that, he said lifelessly, and walked out the hall, leaving her alone in the hallway. The Ministry of Magic was impressive. The moment Rebecca stepped onto the dark, wooden polished floor, she felt as if she was entering a different world. She looked down at the floor, feeling slightly dizzy at the absence of her feet. People entered on occasion through the fireplaces in the walls with wisps of green flames. The ceiling was by far the most intriguing sight, which met Rebecca. It was peacock blue with golden symbols changing all the time. She did, however, not permit herself to take in the sights, which met her for very long. She had to focus on not being walked into by people who could not see her. She kept as close to Raphael as she could. It was a good thing that it was pretty calm at the moment. Raphael frowned as he saw the fountain of magical brethren. That is not reality, is it? No, Rebecca whispered. Centaurs look down on every other race, and goblins aren't very fond of us either. In addition to that, many wizards and witches mistreat creatures like house elves, centaurs, and goblins if they get the chance. Now be quiet! Raphael headed straight for the elevator so that the security man would not give him a hard time since he didn't own a wand. Last time, he had simply stated he had broken his wand by mistake. The security guard had been grumpy about that since he had to check the wand. Rebecca sneaked into the elevator behind Raphael and stood in the corner behind her guardian, who, with his broad posture, blocked it from access for anyone else. When the elevator stopped at the 4th floor, Rebecca hurried after Raphael again. She was caught between excitement and annoyance about being invisible, and of course worry for Yugi and Atem. The moment he entered the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, a short and stout man walked up to him. He took one of Raphael's hands in both of his. Mr. Longeon, such a pleasure to see you here. Again, follow me. Rebecca choked her laughter at the silly name Raphael had given the man and followed in silence. There was no one else present in the hallway at the moment, but that could apparently change at any time, considering the hurry Alexander Bulstrode was in to get to the door at the very end of the hallway. There were 7 doors in the dark hallway, 3 to the left, 3 to the right, and 1 at the end. The corridor was long and dark, leaving a very unwelcome feeling. The first door to the left had a sign which, with luminescent letters, spelled Beast Division. The first door to the right said Being Division. Rebecca wondered how many creatures could know if they were considered being or beast. Bulstrode's voice brought Rebecca back to the there and then. The walls are created so that no creature's magic will work in here. House elves can't apparate to and from here. They can't use magic in here, and no other creature can either. But most importantly, spirits can't leave this place. From the moment a spirit enters this hallway, they cannot leave. Neither can they enter through any of these doors. Rebecca gently poked Raphael. She had a question for Mr. Bulstrode, but of course she couldn't ask herself. Does human magic work? Raphael asked, catching Rebecca's drift. Yes, naturally. Wizard magic works everywhere in the entire Ministry of Magic, he answered. The next 2 doors stated Pest Advisory Board and Office of Misinformation. It seemed that all these doors led to more doors, since the signs only showed subdivisions of the department. The next 2 doors had a sign saying Goblin Liaison Office and Centaur Liaison Office. Rebecca raised an eyebrow at the 2 doors. For some reason, they seemed something of a joke. "That office," Bulstrode said, and pointed at the Centaur Liaison Office, "is a joke. No centaur has ever even set foot in it. Being sent to the centaur office is the same as being sacked. 3 people have actual jobs there. 3. Those jobs are jokes too, since the centaurs ignore everything when they decide." Raphael wisely kept his mouth shut. Finally, they reached the last door in the hallway. This door had no doorknob, and a lot of heavy magical locks on it. Breaking in there would under no circumstance be easy if that turned out to be required. Rebecca carefully paid attention as Bulstrode carefully, and with a lot of drama, asking Raphael to back away, opened the locks. Raphael did as told, but Rebecca went closer, looking carefully at how he opened the door. She memorized it as good as she could, but actually there was little point to it. Most of the things the locks required were personal and would require someone who worked there to open the door. That was, of course, unless they were there to begin with. Rebecca lifted her wand, which, since it was part of her, was invisible too, and whispered "Confundo" as she pointed at the locks. An alarm was set off at once, and Alexander Bulstrode went red. "Damn it!" he yelled and brought out his wand. "Maffiato," he said, and the locks went quiet, although they started glowing a bright red. Alexander Bulstrode turned around at once when he heard a door open behind him. An elderly man came from the door with a pest advisory board sign. "What is going on?" "Confundo," was the word Bulstrode replied with, and muttering confused to himself, the elderly man turned around. Before he closed the door behind him, they could hear him say, "No, it was nothing." Raphael put on a perfect act, tapping his feet, annoyed, and looking doubtful in the eyes of the man who would exterminate a friend unless they did anything about it. I'm sorry. The stout man repeated a number of times, and then looked at the locks. "This has never happened before. Right, what to do? Yes, I know. Can I please practice magic on you, Mr. Long John?" Raphael did not look the least pleased with that. "Why would you?" "There is a spell to open the door at once in cases of emergency. I cannot take the chance that you'll hear it. It's a spell especially designed for these doors." Doors. That meant the spell worked on more than just this one door, but probably on all the doors with such a lock. With a little luck, perhaps even to the one leading to the torture chamber Tracy had told them about. She looked at Raphael, praying he'd turn away from his dislike of magic. "Just this once." "Fine," he grunted, "but be quick." With a simple spell, Bulstrode made sure that Raphael couldn't hear, while Rebecca came as close as she could. She had to hear that spell. Alexander Bulstrode had a pretty high-pitched voice, higher than Yugi's even, but it allowed him to speak with a low voice if he had to. Luckily, Rebecca heard exactly what he said. Bulstrode waved at Raphael, telling him to come and enter. Then he closed the door and whispered a different incantation, one which Rebecca missed. She cursed silently. She had not been prepared for a secondary spell. Instead of worrying too much about it, she focused on the hallway they were in. For understandable reasons, Rebecca felt as if she had just left Dracula's mansion and stepped into a spaceship from an old sci-fi movie. Everything was white. The doors, the walls, everything. Even the flames which enlightened the room were white, giving a very familiar TL-like atmosphere. The first 5 doors were offices of the people working in the Spirit Division. There were 3 name tags on each door, with the exception for the last of the 5, which only had 1 name. The director of the Spirit Division, Rebecca assumed. "No one else is here," Bulstrode informed them to Rebecca's delight. "This is everyone's day off." He opened the second door to the right and entered casually, sitting down behind his desk and inviting Raphael to sit. Raphael had purposefully not closed the door, but Rebecca decided to check out the rest of the Spirit Division, which didn't look all too big while she still had the time. She walked further down the hallway and saw a door with a sign saying, "Ghosts." She supposed that in this world, ghost and spirit were far from the same thing, like they often seem to be in the Muggle world. She ignored the door, mostly since it didn't have the security which had been present on the first door. The next said Inferi, and although that door was most definitely locked and jammed, the sounds from the inside indicated that it was more to keep things in than to keep people out. Rebecca passed a couple other doors, which were of no interest to her, like the dossier room and the storage room. But when she reached the room which had a sign saying room of destroyed spirits. She suddenly found her task a lot harder. They should, at all costs, prevent that Atem ended up there. She wondered, however, why there was such a room. Tracy had said that they were spread in the ocean. Without further delay, she walked to the end of the hallway. To her left, there was nothing else but something that seemed to be a sort of mailbox. Rebecca pulled it towards her and saw that it was a sort of box. She assumed from the smell that whatever was put into it wouldn't be amused when it reached the other side. Rebecca was pretty sure that on the other side was the basilisk waiting to receive his meal. This was a smart and safe way to give him the food he needed. At least not everyone in the ministry seemed as stupid as Bulstrode. The door right in front of her had the heaviest lock of all those she had seen so far. She wondered if the spell would work, but she wouldn't try it. To the left, the door was unsecured, and Rebecca opened it slowly. She slipped in as soon as she could and let the door be. A high-pitched voice started to squeal at once. "Minnie, look! Someone opened the door!" A short elf, even shorter than average, pointed at the door with pointy fingers, and his tennis ball eyes were wide with fear. The house elf called Minnie did, however, not seem impressed. "That door has been broken as long as us has been here!" Minnie complained and went to close the door. The room was extremely dark, and Rebecca was sure that even if she had been visible, they would not have noticed her. "Instead of looking at the door," Minnie continued, looking annoyed, "look for the spirit like we were ordered!" The shorter house elf squealed in awe and ran for the wall. Rebecca let him, although she averted her eyes. Most of all, she had wanted to stop him from hurting himself, but she couldn't do that. She wondered vaguely how the elves were treated here at the ministry. She doubted it was any good. The moment she looked up, she looked straight through the large window to the left of the door, and she had to bite her tongue so she wouldn't scream. She had known this, yet she hated it fiercely. Did the ministry really practice those things on people? Rebecca was more grateful than ever that Yugi had been so easily separated from Atem, that anyone could survive that. The room seemed to be a gathering of torture devices from every century. Somewhere against the wall stood an iron chair, just like it was always described. There were spikes all over it, on the back, seat, armrests, leg rest, and footrest. Next to it, several bricks were laying. She supposed they were used as weight. A traditional rack was present too. She chose not to even register the many other present torture devices. Rebecca noticed that tears were rolling down her face, and for once she wasn't annoyed by them, since she knew they weren't a sign of sorrow, but of fear and relief. The puzzle was laying in the middle of the room, the pieces gathered in a pile. They looked as if someone had casually discarded them there, and that someone later had swept them together. Minnie and the other elf were standing in front of the window in silence, looking for something they clearly couldn't see. Rebecca wondered where Atem was at. How did he feel? Was he conscious of anything, or was it as if he was asleep? Endless darkness? His soul room? Rebecca didn't know. Yugi probably had a better answer than she did. She saw the hatch giving the basilisk access to the room and shook her head. The door with the heavy security had to be the one leading to the chamber she was looking at now, with disgust written over her invisible face. She turned around and left the room again. Minnie started complaining about the door again as the other elf proclaimed that they were haunted. Rebecca shook her head and walked back to the office where Bulstrode and Raphael were still talking. Mostly small talk, it seemed. Rebecca walked into the room and touched Raphael lightly on the shoulder to make him know that she was done and she had located the room they were here for.
"I believe 4 or 5 different people have had this desk before me. I have the most dangerous job in the team, you know,"
Bulstrode proclaimed and sounded proud. Raphael nodded.
"Then may I ask what you work with?" "I'm the torture master, the only one in the room when the spirit is separated from the body. It has happened several times that these foul beings kill those who have caused them so much trouble."
He still sounded proud. The blood drained from Rebecca's face, and her adult accomplice in this scam narrowed his eyes.
"I have heard of your methods."
She had to applaud Raphael for his calm. She could, however, not stay in the office. She walked out and sunk to the ground against the wall as she wiped the sweat from her brow. It felt slightly weird that she couldn't see her own hands, but she supposed it was a good time. She listened as Raphael tactically ended the conversation and stood up when the two men entered the hallway. Actually, this was a scary side of Raphael, the one which made that he'd easily fit in with the sophisticated evil guys. The ones who had more tricks on their sleeve than your average thug could ever dream of. Bulstrode didn't follow them further than the door to the spirit division and waved Raphael off from there. Raphael didn't hesitate, but quickly made his way towards the elevator. He didn't seem to have a problem with waiting to tell Rebecca what had happened in the office. Neither did he seem to be in a hurry to learn what had happened when she was exploring the division. Without drawing any attention, they hurried out of the Ministry of Magic and back to their own non-magical world. Rebecca knew that both she and Raphael preferred it in the Muggle world, and they both had similar reasons. Magic had brought them nothing but loss. As soon as they reached the car, Raphael pulled the robes over his head and tossed them with a disgusted sound into the trunk. Underneath, he was wearing his usual outfit, and he shook his arms to let them know that they were free from the suffocating robes. "Rebecca," he asked as he unlocked the car. "I'm here," Rebecca whispered from the other side of the car. She was standing next to the passenger seat. She wasn't willing to risk that someone saw nothing open and close the door. Instead, Raphael opened it, then acted confused, and closed the door again. He was a good actor. It wasn't until they started driving that the conversation began. "How did it go?" Rebecca asked curiously. "He'll postpone everything until August," Raphael said. "He is not going to sell. They would know that it was his fault." "We are going to have to steal it, you mean?" Rebecca asked. Raphael nodded and looked her way. "Yes." His eyes narrowed when he didn't see anyone sitting next to him. "How long are you going to be invisible?" Rebecca shrugged before realizing that would do Raphael no good. "I don't know. I found the puzzle, by the way. It really is a torture chamber." She shuddered. "Torture master," Raphael scoffed, condescending. "And he's proud of it." Rebecca shuddered again. Yes, proud was exactly what he had been. Could he really find joy in using all those instruments? And why so many different? Wouldn't one do? "I'm not sure how hard it will be to break in," she said to avert her thoughts. "I heard the spell used on the first door, but I doubt it'll work on the door leading to the torture chamber." Rebecca could, however, not get the thought of Yugi being tortured on one of those devices out of her head. She didn't feel so good, to tell the truth. She vaguely noticed that her hands were shaking. "The basilisk shouldn't be a problem, though. I'm not sure if the window can be broken. I know that it must be magically strengthened, at least at regular assaults, but perhaps a spell could break it. The spell's warding of spirits should not affect regular spells." "We'll talk more about that with the others. Let's go tell them our findings, then we can focus on saving the Pharaoh." Dean had followed the progress of the 3 Hogwarts dropouts and the to Dean mysterious Raphael closely. But actually, the only thing they had achieved was to postpone the process. Dean was disappointed, although he hadn't expected much more. Dean had, in his turn, kept Hermione, Ron, and Harry informed. It was, however, not always equally easy to communicate, mostly since the 5th years were deep into their owls. Tracy often teased him about how relaxed it was not having to worry about school, but Dean wasn't jealous. He knew that Tracy herself, unlike Rebecca, liked Hogwarts and magic and everything that went with it, and that she would have preferred owls over sitting in an apartment planning to free a spirit. Rebecca's stunt had become somewhat of a legend at the school, but the result was that every single student in the school was mad at her. Especially Angelina, who had been convinced that Gryffindor otherwise would have won. Rebecca wasn't too bothered by any of it, at least according to Tracy. It was when they were heading back from their first owl theory of charms that Dean heard something new about the fire. Dean and Seamus had accompanied Harry, Ron, and Hermione on their way back to the common room when they heard a second-year student tell the colorful story about the fire Rebecca had started. "It's weird that we never hear about the dragon, though," Ron said, subdued. "That was the most interesting part of it all." The other 4 stopped on the spot. "What dragon?" Dean asked, and looked around at the other 3. Hermione shook her head while Harry shrugged. "I wasn't there." Seamus held up his hands. "I got out once it started burning, man. Everything that has anything to do with pyrotechnic haunts me." Seamus had a point there, so Dean had only himself to rely on. Certainly he had been more focused on getting the others away from the stands, but could he really have missed a dragon? "Ron, are you sure?" he asked doubtful. "It's the dragon that put out the fire, man. The teachers failed miserably at that. Naturally, Dean took contact with Tracy after that and asked about the dragon. Rebecca confirmed that indeed there had been a dragon. She called him Tyrant Dragon, but Dean didn't care much about that. Things were strange. The owls went on, and Tracy and her friends were still planning their break-in into the Ministry of Magic. Dean personally thought it was hopeless, but he didn't say so. He kept a low profile constantly and simply watched. He didn't see anything interesting until his astronomy exam, which he finished pretty smoothly before 5 figures made their way to Hagrid's cabin. He watched it in silence, and as soon as the exam was done, he informed those outside Hogwarts that now both McGonagall and Hagrid were out of play. The answer he received from Tracy was gloomy. They both agreed that Hogwarts now was a hopeless case. Dean silently decided that if nothing was going to be done about Umbridge, then he'd finish his owls and leave the school for good. Perhaps he could apply for a different school, Durmstrang, even if it was required. Being on edge as Dean was, he was perfectly observant. When Harry fell off his chair screaming during their final exam, Dean was already prepared. He stuck close to Ron and Hermione just out of their sight, knowing Harry wouldn't approach his friends in the company of strangers. His patience was rewarded as he eavesdropped on the conversation. Voldemort's got Sirius. Dean had no idea whatsoever who Sirius was. The first person which came to his mind was Sirius Black, but it seemed unlikely Harry would be so upset about that. Sirius Black was, after all, a wanted serial killer. Ron and Hermione, however, did know who Harry was talking about. What? How'd you... Saw it, just now, when I fell asleep in the exam. But where? How? Hermione asked, her face white. I don't know how, said Harry, but I know exactly where. There's a room in the Department of Mysteries full of shelves covered in these little glass balls, and they're at the end of row 97. He's trying to use Sirius to get whatever it is he wants from in there. He's torturing him. Says he'll end by killing him. Harry found his voice was shaking, as were his knees. He moved over to a desk and sat down on it, trying to master himself. How are we going to get there? He asked them. There was a moment's silence. Then Ron asked, Get there? Get to the Department of Mystery so we can rescue Sirius, Harry said loudly. But, Harry, Ron asked weakly. What? Harry asked, all out of patience. He could not understand why they were both gaping at him as though he was asking them something unreasonable. Harry, said Hermione in a rather frightened voice, how did Voldemort get into the Ministry of Magic without anybody realizing he was there? How do I know? Harry bellowed. The question is how we're going to get in there. But, Harry, think about this, Hermione said, taking a step towards him. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The Ministry of Magic must be full of workers. How would Voldemort and Sirius have gotten in without being seen? Harry, they're probably the 2 most wanted wizards in the world. You think they could get into a building full of workers undetected? It was Sirius Black they were talking about. He found that hard to comprehend at first, but then he recalled the way they wrote in the Daily Prophet about the Pharaoh. A Pharaoh who wasn't a foul creature at all. A Pharaoh known publicly as a ravenous murderer. Actually, just like Sirius Black. Hermione convinced Harry to go check if his dream was more than a dream first. When they were captured by Umbridge together with Luna, Ginny, and Neville, Dean tried to sneak away so he wouldn't get directly involved. He was, however, stopped by an annoyed Ravenclaw. What the hell is going on? Peter! Dean called out, surprised. The Ravenclaw had been down ever since he and Rebecca had their little fight. Dean had learned from Luna that it had been Peter who had turned Rebecca in to Umbridge. Dean had been shocked at that news, to say the least. Peter and Rebecca had certainly drifted apart since Rebecca started acting out on the school. But to turn her in... No, Dean didn't get it. Fred, George, and Tracy left. Rebecca left. That bunch is about to get expelled, and you are sneaking around here. Will it just be me who is going to be left here? He asked, clearly pissed. Dean stood up and dragged Peter behind him into an empty classroom before anyone from the Inquisitorial squad could catch them. I'm going to the Ministry of Magic with that bunch. Rebecca and Tracy will be there. Possibly Professor Muto too. Are all of you going to free the spirit? Peter asked, incredulous. Dean shook his head. No, they're going there for a different reason. They are going to save Sirius Black from Voldemort. Tracy, Rebecca, and I are going to save the spirit. That bunch is the perfect distraction. The Ministry won't know what to expect there. Peter was silent for a full minute. What the hell? He yelled when it dawned on him. Sirius Black, the serial killer? Not if you ask Harry, Dean hissed, urging Peter to speak with a more subdued voice. Professor Muto's spirit has been put down as a murderer too, but he's not. Why wouldn't they lie about Sirius Black? Peter shook his head. It's still insane! Dean decided he couldn't do much more.
Go to dinner, Peter. I'm going to contact Rebecca and Tracy. I assume you won't turn me in the way you turned Rebecca in.
Peter's eyes burned. Dean backed away involuntarily at that gaze.
I turned her in so no students would come to harm. She could have killed the Quidditch players. She didn't care. I talked with her just before the game. Besides, I'm not going anywhere. I'm coming too.
What? Dean asked, dumbfounded.
I have no idea who that spirit is. But Rebecca clearly cared for him. That's enough for me. I'll help her get him back.
Then they heard the sound of a fight coming from Umbridge's office. Peter and Dean rushed out the empty classroom towards Umbridge's office. They stopped dead in the door opening as they saw a miniature battlefield. Peter stunned Millicent Bulstrode, who was the last one of the inquisitorial squad who was still standing. Malfoy ran past them, his hands covering his face. Dean stepped aside for him. "There they go!" Luna said, and pointed at Harry, Hermione, and Umbridge, who were heading towards the Forbidden Forest.
"Let's follow,"
Ron said enthusiastically. However, when the four turned to leave the office, they saw Peter and Dean standing there, their arms crossed.
"It's not
what we think," Dean suggested with a wry smile. Dean's smile was more honest.
"Hey, if you guys are going to save an infamous serial killer, then I'm in."
He turned around and walked towards the entrance hall without waiting for any of the others. On his way there, he conjured the book Rebecca had given him. He wrote quickly before the others could catch up with him. "Harry, Hermione, Ron, Luna, Neville, Ginny, Peter, and I are heading for the Ministry now. Harry, too, has someone to save tonight. A good source is telling us that the Ministry is easier accessible than it has been for years, and ever will be when tonight is over."